The wind that sweeps across Missouri carries whispers of a name once spoken in fear and fascination. Jesse James, a name that cuts like a blade, leaving a trail of blood, legend, and unanswered questions. But what lies beneath the stories? Beneath the ballads that paint him as a Robin Hood of the West? Jesse Woodson James was born in 1847 into a world as divided and chaotic as his legacy would later become. The Civil War was not yet upon America, but the seeds of its destruction were already sown. Jesse grew up in Clay County, Missouri, a borderland caught between North and South, where allegiances shifted like the wind and violence simmered beneath the surface. His father, a Baptist preacher, died when Jesse was just a boy, leaving the family vulnerable in a world that preyed on weakness. Can you imagine the impact of such a loss? The absence of guidance in a land where survival often required more ruthlessness than righteousness? When the Civil War erupted, Missouri became a battlefield of divided loyalties, and Jesse, still a teenager, followed his older brother Frank into the chaos. They joined William Quantrill's Raiders, a Confederate guerrilla group infamous for its brutality. Jesse was no soldier in the conventional sense. He was a marauder, a young man molded by blood and fire. In the infamous Lawrence Massacre of 1863, Quantrill's men slaughtered over 150 unarmed men and boys. Jesse's hands may not have been stained with blood that day, but his heart was forever hardened. The war ended, but for Jesse, the battle never truly ceased. The Reconstruction era brought humiliation and poverty to the South, and Jesse turned his anger toward the Union and its supporters. Alongside Frank and a band of outlaws, he began a career of robbery and violence that would span more than a decade. The James Younger Gang became a force of terror across the Midwest. Their robberies were daring, their escapes legendary, their violence unrelenting. In 1876, the gang attempted to rob the First National Bank of Northfield, Minnesota. It was a disaster. The townspeople fought back, killing several gang members and forcing Jesse and Frank to flee. The Northfield raid marked the beginning of the end for the James brothers, but their legend only grew. How does failure transform into myth? And why do we celebrate those who wield guns and fear as though they are heroes? Jesse's charisma was undeniable. He was charming, articulate, and skilled at shaping his image. Through letters to newspapers, he cast himself as a defender of the common man, railing against the railroads, banks, and politicians he claimed were oppressing the South. But this image was a facade. Jesse James was no Robin Hood. He did not steal from the rich to give to the poor. He stole to feed his own insatiable hunger for power and wealth. Behind the bravado, Jesse was a man haunted by paranoia. He trusted no one, not even his closest allies. As law enforcement closed in, he grew increasingly erratic, his world shrinking with each passing year. By the early 1880s, Jesse was living under an assumed name, desperately clinging to the remnants of his gang and his myth. Jesse's end came not at the hands of lawmen, but through betrayal. On April 3, 1882, as he straightened a picture on the wall of his home, one of his own men, Robert Ford, shot him in the back of the head. Ford had been lured by the promise of a reward, a bitter irony for a man who had built his life on betrayal and violence. Jesse died as he had lived, suddenly, violently, and without warning. Was his death justice, or simply the inevitable conclusion of a life lived on the edge of a knife? In death, Jesse James became larger than life. His funeral was a spectacle, his grave a shrine, and his name immortalized in song and story. But what is it we celebrate? Is it his defiance, his audacity, or the tragedy of a man who could never find peace? And what does our fascination with men like Jesse James say about us? Do we see in them our own desires for freedom, our own struggles against authority, or something darker, a reflection of our capacity for destruction? The truth of Jesse James is as elusive as the man himself. He was a product of his time, a figure shaped by war, poverty, and a fractured nation. But he was also a man who made choices, who reveled in the violence he caused and the fear he inspired. His story is not one of redemption, but of ruin, a reminder that the line between hero and villain is often drawn in blood. The wind still whispers his name, but it carries no answers, only questions that echo across the years. Who was Jesse James? And why, even now, do we still feel the shadow of his presence, lingering like the smoke from a gunshot, fading, but never truly gone? Let us know if you enjoyed this video. Also, let us know in the comments what historical figures you'd like us to profile next. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more videos like these.